Welcome to Keep It Humane, the podcast, where we dive deep into topics surrounding kindness, compassion, and creating a more humane world, whether it's in our communities, in the workplace, or in the world of animal control and shelters. With our hosts,
Ashlee Bishop.
And Ashlee Bishop.
And I'm Daniel Ettinger. This show is sponsored by Tomahawk Live Trap. Check them out, livetrap.com. Hello, Ashlee Bishop.
Hello.
We're waiting on the other Ashlee Bishop. She probably has a computer from like the 1940s. Like it's an entire room in her house in Wisconsin and it's updating. I think she has to pour like oil into it so it can actually function. But she'll be joining us shortly. Please don't forget to check out our socials. That's Keep It Humane everywhere. I guess not on TikTok though, because that thing is not working right now. Thanks to whatever ban. Do you know anything about this TikTok ban? I don't know anything about it.
I don't really understand it all. I've been reading comments and things like that. And other than that, supposedly TikTok is selling our information and the government doesn't like it. And, whatever.
Yeah, I remember when it first came out, that was the whole thing. Like they're stealing information. I'm like, yeah, they can do that. Um, I don't know, but we're available on all those things except right now TikTok. So please check it out. Make sure you like, share, rate the podcast. It would be great if you could leave a review. That helps others, as our slogan is help people help animals. Well, we want you to help people because we bring some great stuff. We're gonna have an awesome guest here in a second from SPARC, and so you'll want to stay tuned for that. That's going to be exciting. I was doing some digging, Bishop, before I go any further.
Oh, no.
No, this is pretty amazing. So I have all these old archived animal control magazines, like from the 1980s, before you were born.
Mhm.
And it's pretty incredible to see how relevant some of this stuff is. But one of the coolest things I found was an ad by Live Traps. So Tomahawk Live Traps, who is our show sponsor, by the way. And don't forget to check out their website. They're celebrating their 100th year of business this year in 2025. They're a family-owned, operated business who work with humane professionals around the world to produce the safest and most effective animal handling equipment available. You can save 10% on their products by using discount code Keep It Humane. That's Keep It Humane in all caps. Or you can also go to their website, livetrap.com, or call them at 800-272-8727. Now, I say that because I have to read this ad from the 1980s. It's the coolest thing. I don't know if
That's
you can see
awesome.
it. Wait, oh, I have my back.
Uh-huh.
I'll put it in.
Post, I
Oh,
was going to say, oh,
there it is.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. So check this out.
that's so neat.
Live Trap. Again, this is from October of 1982. Tomahawk live traps and cages are strong, safe, simple to operate, and completely assembled. These galvanized metal wire cages are constructed in both rigid and collapsible models and are shipped ready to use. They come in various sizes for catching and transporting such animals as mice, chipmunks, beavers, raccoons, skunks, rabbits, cats, dogs, squirrels, turtles, pigeons, fish, and rats. Priced from $14 to $247 for a complete list of specifications and prices. Right. Tomahawk Live Trap Company, Department C, P.O. Box 323, Tomahawk, Wisconsin. Isn't that crazy? Because obviously you don't have a website back in the 80s. So you had to write them and do the P.O. Box.
That's amazing. That
I
is
was so happy.
absolutely amazing.
When I found it, I sent it directly to Kyle. Like, look what
Mhm.
I just found. It's probably older than he is, to be honest.
Probably. Or maybe around the same time. He can't be much older than I am.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, you're like what, 30? Anyway.
Sir, 35. Okay. I just turned 35.
What's neat though to see how like they advertised back then because it was clearly like I don't think like cat trapping was a thing back then for like
Mm-mm.
TNR, you know? So like they're catching turtles.
That's amazing. And I will have to say, I think I don't remember or recall, but we had to try to catch a beaver once over here. And I'm pretty sure we bought it from Tomahawk. And I think we bought their musk as well.
Okay.
So yeah, we weren't successful, not because of the trap, it's just the beaver was smart.
Yeah,
Um, but that's interesting.
it is. Everything good in Texas? How are you?
It's cold. that winter storm has gotten here and it's like 30 degrees. I know it's nothing compared to what I'm sure Wisconsin's going through right now. But yeah, we're, making sure that my old shelter that was built in the 1980s is going to be able to withstand everything. So we kind of prepared for all of that this week. Our metal building in the back in our dog hall is not quote unquote climate controlled. We do have heaters back there and they work wonderfully. But still, because it is a metal building, we worry about our pipes and things like that. So we'll see how it goes along. It's supposed to dip into the like teens in the next couple of days.
Nope.
We're supposed to get snow.
Nope. Uh,
So yeah, so we'll see how it goes in the next few days.
Texas will be on a state of emergency with a flurry.
Honestly, give me a hurricane category 5 any day. I can deal with that any single day of my life. I'm used
Uh,
to it from living on the coast, but this dang cold weather, get it out of here.
it
We're
was
not meant for this.
it was 45 when I woke up this morning, and I was
I
like, I'm not ready for that.
I hate you. I just
I think that's why Wisconsin Bishop's not here. Is her computer's so cold up there in Wisconsin? She's trying to get it started up. Uh,
but,
well,
but we're surviving. How are you? How are
I'm
things in Cali?
I'm good. Yesterday was a busy day for me, and so I'm just happy to be here doing the podcast this morning with you, and yeah, just keeping it moving. That's my motto.
I agree. It's been busy, I'm sure, for everybody right now. It's been insane, the amount of calls that have been coming through. And of course, it's that season of I got a puppy and I don't want it
Mm,
anymore.
yeah,
So we've been seeing quite a bit of that as well. And so, as I said last podcast, we seized those 11 dogs. We're
yeah.
still in the process of all of that. So it's been it's been fun. Busy week.
Every week,
I
every
know,
week.
right?
Well, yeah. Well, let's jump into our guest today. I'm pretty excited about Spark, and this is new to me. I learned about it late last year, and it looks like they're doing some great stuff. So I would like to introduce our guest, Hanna Lentz. She's the executive director of Spark. Good morning, or I guess it's still morning where you are. How are
Yes.
things?
Still morning. Good. I think we are cold. We're getting snow, and I'm in the DC area. We're not totally used to
Mm.
snow either, but I lived in New England for a number of years,
Oh.
so I don't mind it. I like the snow. I think it's an adventure.
I mean, snow is beautiful. Like when you go outside and there's a fresh, clean layer of something over all this, like especially in DC, like that
It's
grimy, disgusting DC. I'm just kidding.
I mean, there's something to that for sure. Yeah, and my actually all my pets happen to be Canadian, so they love the snow. They're like, I'm home, and they're good. So, yeah, we're all right with the cold weather.
Well, I have to ask, are they like Labradors because they're from Labrador, Canada, or you actually rescued them from Canada?
No, it's a friend of mine who works with remote communities who sometimes need help with rehoming their pets. So one's a lab mix, one's a big old shepherd mix, and one cat,
Okay.
Canadian cat. Yeah.
So, Hannah, I guess for us and some of our listeners that may not know, like, what does SPARC stand for? What's the acronym? And then
Sure.
what is your background and how did this all get started?
Yeah. Okay. So SPARC stands for Supporting People in Animal Relationships for Change, which has meaning, but we say SPARC because that's a mouthful and a lot to remember, right? And
Mhm.
so, SPARC, we're focused on really messages, stories. We call that sort of narratives, and how that shapes the mindsets that we have about people, how that shapes the mindsets we have about people and animals, and how telling better stories and messages can really help us do our best work. So, I mean, there's sort of how I got into this space. There's how Spark came to be. I would say that so Spark was really the came together from a group of folks. It started, if we want to like go back to the origins, like the babyest baby version of Spark, it started with the work of a lot of individuals who were specifically in New England, and
Okay.
it was about 6 or 7 years ago. And they were feeling like, listen, our reality here in New England, it's different from the rest of the country. When people are talking about not having enough homes for all the animals that we have coming into our facilities. A lot of places in New England were saying, we don't have enough animals for all the people who want to adopt them. There was a lot of, transport into New England that was happening. So there were these questions that were swirling around of like, what's next? What's the future of our work? So we spent a couple years actually just focused on that question. And then afterwards, the group said, you know what? Like, let's tackle another big gnarly problem. And I like a good big gnarly problem. And so they said messaging nationwide, we're having messaging issues. And so we spent some time just looking at right? Like what's going on with messaging? What are the problems? Because it's not just one thing, right? It's how we talk about people in our communities. It's how we talk about people in our sector. It's villainizing, it's shaming, it's blaming, it's, the kinds of stereotypes that we use that give people ideas about, who someone's going to be when they show up. And
Sure.
so, um, their goal at that point was let's look at this problem. Is there a framework? Are there recommendations that we could come out with for how to message better? And so we did. And there were three principles that are really the core of Spark today. And it's around how we get away from, just talking about individuals. How can we actually talk about the big systems that limit the options and choices that people have that really shape some of the things that people can do? Um, also, what we call messaging with dignity. So, how the way that we talk about people can either create a feeling of, value and welcome and belonging, like we can do this work together, like collaboration. We're in this together and finding ways that people really are the connection and the key to doing our best work for animals. And then there's one around listening, where if we're going to be good messengers, if we're going to be trusted messengers, we have to first be good listeners. So we started talking about these, and that was kind of meant to be the endpoint. And we started presenting them at conferences.
Okay.
And the response was so big. I mean, people were so excited about this work. I think because messaging is a real pain point. Um, and we were diving into it that Spark honestly was created in response to people in the sector saying, we want more, we want resources. How can we do this better? What are these messages that we can be saying? And so the group of individuals, I'm lucky to be the advisory committee. I'm lucky to be the executive director, but we have an amazing advisory committee, contractors, just hired our first staff. So there's really a lot of people behind
You
the scenes
you
making it
actually
happen.
have someone that I've looked up to for a long time, and she probably knows this, but we haven't been in touch in many years. Jan McHugh Smith is
Oh,
someone that I truly idolize, and I've worked for her at one point in my career
yeah,
in a kind of indirect way,
yeah.
and she's always been someone that if she hears this, she might feel embarrassed, but she's special in the aspects that like I really appreciate all that she's done for this industry, and it's cool to see her working on projects like this as well.
Yeah, yeah, she's amazing. And she's been, when she thinks about how we treat people and the relationships between how we treat people and the work we do for animals, she's been thinking about that for a long time and really holding that torch. So it's pretty exciting to have her on the committee. She's been
Sure.
amazing.
Well, welcome Ashlee Bishop from Wisconsin. It looks like, did you plan, is this what took you so long? Is you had to get the right shirt on so you matched Ashlee Bishop from Texas? What's going on?
No, great minds just think alike. No, my computer just hated me today.
Is it because it's too cold up there and it couldn't get started?
I mean, it is in the negatives. So,
No. Ugh.
Mm-mm.
yeah.
See, I told you it was worse over there.
She had a 2 hour delay for the show, like it was school because it's so cold up there.
Yeah. No, it's negative 11, but it feels like negative 30.
It feels
Mm-mm.
like I'm not going outside if I live there.
Yeah.
No. Mm-mm. Not that.
So,
So, Hannah, I think a big thing for our industry, and then I think with animal control as well, as we move forward out of this dog catcher persona,
Yeah.
we're not dog catchers anymore. We're not, the dog pounds anymore either. How do y'all fit that sense of community and how to interact with your communities with y'all's nonprofit?
Right. Right. So Well, it's interesting that you brought up the dog catcher persona because I know that that's something that you all are thinking about, right? And talking about a lot is even the stereotype around the dog catcher or the dog pound. And
Mhm.
I feel like those stereotypes can range everywhere from sort of almost like the Disney, like
Mhm.
goofy, bumbling, non-skilled person to someone who's just going to show up and dole out punishments, right? Who we should be scared of. And I know that from my experiences working at animal control and with animal control officers and, friends that I have that are animal control officers, when I think of animal services or animal control, I think of like, okay, this is someone who is really resourceful, who's really skilled. I mean, the situations that folks have to go into and figure things out, right? It's like, oh, there's a tiny kitten crying somewhere in a pipe somewhere, and you have to figure it out and get the kitten out, to,
Mhm.
going into being called to assist with like a crime scene where you're actually having to remove animals, right? To,
Sorry for laughing, but that literally happened yesterday to me
yeah,
as far
yeah,
as a
to,
crime scene.
right, right. To my neighbor's dog is barking, to there's a family of ducks somewhere that need to be moved. I mean, think of all the different kinds of situations, right? And so I know, right, from like what I've seen and experienced and the world of animal services and animal control. Folks are resourceful, skilled. I would say brave. Like there's not a lot of people that just have to wake up and figure it like any call that comes in, you have to go and respond to it and figure it out. So that does not fit, right? The buff like the Disney goofy falling over themselves buffoon. And that also does not fit the like just coming here to dole out punishments and make people, feel badly or lose their animals. And so when we think about stereotype, when we think about messaging, right, one of the things we talk about is stereotypes and how we really need to talk about the realities of people, how we need to talk about people as individuals, how we need to talk about organizations and communities as the unique individuals, communities, organizations that they are, so that we can move away from some of these stereotypes, for example, which is just it's not about like going after and battling them. The interesting thing about stereotypes is if we try to do a lot of debunking for folks, if we try to like say, no, 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 like that's not true, and we're just fighting it, people get really stuck in their beliefs about it. So we
Mhm.
talk about replace, like what is the story? What is the real message about who people are? And how can we be saying that more? How can we be saying that together and consistently? And so I think to your question then about how that impacts our work in our community, I almost have that question for you all because I think imagine like the what you wish people understood about this profession. Imagine that was the mainstream. Like what would be different in your work? Like what do you feel like would be different in your relationships with community members or how you were able to do your job?
I think, at least
Ooh.
for us in our agency, and we're very honest, honest to a point where obviously we're not slapping people in the face, but enough to let them know the realities of what's going on and that we cannot achieve the goals that most communities want to achieve if we don't have the community's help.
Mm,
And having them realize also too what our job is beyond the dog catcher stereotype. We are probably one of the few industries that have to deal with three different problems. One being the animal, two being the person, and then also three being the reality of what people think of us on a daily basis.
yeah.
So it's super important for us and our group to change that narrative, especially in our community because we're very small. Um, to make sure they understand, why we're here and understand that we don't want your animal. Like we're not here to pick up
We
your
don't.
dog. We don't want your animals. We don't, and that's a thing of the past. That is not what we want. We want to ensure that you keep this animal. We want to educate you. Our slogan for our agency is education before citation.
Mm,
So we educate, 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 educate. Once you've been educated, then that's when we can move forward with that conversation of, well, why haven't things been fixed?
mhm.
So, again, we really try, and I think our community really starts to appreciate it. When I started and I took over our agency, the realities of what we're having to deal with, and why we're dealing with these things, and that it's a community problem, not a shelter problem.
Mm, yeah. Well, and I really appreciate you talking about how you think about those interactions and those relationships in a different way. Because, one of the things when we talk about like mindsets and people is one of the things we think about is there's something very universal about humans, which is everybody wants to be treated with dignity. Like everybody wants to be treated like they have value, respected, right? Like they belong in a situation. And so, when we approach our interactions with people from a dignity mindset, when we approach the way we talk about people or issues, that is what starts to open the door for people to be like, okay, right? Like, let's have this conversation. Like, I see how you're showing up. And so, and a lot of that is, the stuff that gets put out. Like, there's so many messages swirl around that's always saying, like, people are the problem and pet owners are the problem. And I think that that gets really embedded in our heads. But when we can switch to thinking like, let's have a conversation first. Like we're here to find solutions together, to dole out punishments. That's what can make things start to change and people respond differently too. Yeah.
Wisconsin Bishop, I feel like you had something on this.
Well, I don't know if it's naive of me to say, but I feel like in general, we are here to shelter the animals
Mm,
and not shelter the public from the issues that the animals are going through,
Mm.
if that makes
mm.
sense.
Yeah,
It does.
say more about that. I'm curious.
Well, to Texas Bishop's point of, being honest with them and opening up that communication of like, okay, this is what we're going through, this is what we're dealing with, um, instead of only just the happy, fluffy kittens and puppies and, telling them the legitimacy of the job so that they can understand where maybe they can have an impact, um, on making it better for the animals and then thereby the staff and things like that.
Mm,
And
Agreed.
I go back to the history of it all, and that's kind of my, as both Ashleys know, I geek out on some of the old time stuff. And the 1811 law concerning dogs in New York City, we're over 200 years of that being ingrained into our conditioning as humans in this country and our social norms. Dogs were huge rabies threats.
Vectors.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Vectors.
back then,
Vectors.
like huge. Where I mean, it was so bad to a point where they didn't even understand it really at that point. So if a dog was just a stray dog, they assumed that it had rabies because it wasn't loved. Like I'm not making that up. That's facts.
mm,
And so we come from that kind of that image that is passed down from generation to generation. And I use this example a lot. Sometimes when you're called the dog catcher, it might not be in a way that is to be disrespectful. It may just be the vocabulary of someone. That's how they know this profession. And I think what both of you, or all of us, have talked about, but both of you just now answering that question, is the more that people see that we're a trusted resource in the community, the better impacts that we make. And I think, Hanna, to your point, not focusing on really challenging that stereotype. It's just putting good product out there. It's
that's right.
creating whether it's this podcast that is designed to not only be for people in our field, but anyone that wants to listen that has an interest in the animal welfare in this country or abroad. And
Hmm.
that's our goal, is to give you insight. Now, there are times where maybe there is a stray dog that if it's not caught, it could hurt itself or others. We do have to be the dog catcher in those moments. But then we also have to go into a home and be extremely compassionate to a person who may be dealing with a mental health situation and has 65 cats or 83 poodles. And really the focus is helping that person, but also helping those animals. And that's our slogan, help people, help animals. I love the talking about how we are using words and kind of the unconscious bias in this profession. And
Mm.
we'll get into that a little bit later. I think both bishops know where I'm going with that, but I don't want to have that lead this program. So I I will turn it back over to one of you two to maybe jump into another topic.
Well, I think in this profession, so some of us come into it with very little to no training or expertise.
Mhm.
I think that's getting better. But one of the things that we don't often get taught or have the opportunity to learn unless you get to take like a verbal judo class, which is really just um, how to deal with the people that are anxious and angry, but not how to deal with the community members. Does your organization offer anything as far as helping others learn how to speak to their communities and then make those connections?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So there's probably two or three pieces to this that I can mention. One is yeah, if we're thinking about those direct day-to-day interactions, we talk about listening, we talk about empathic listening, and so how you can show up in a conversation with somebody. Your body language, the kinds of questions you ask, even like how you're setting your mind before you go into that situation so that you're in a
I
position of
want to
really,
I
yeah,
want to
go
pause
ahead.
you for just a second, Hannah. Anybody else feel like she's judging us and how we're sitting and talking to her right now?
Me?
I'm kidding.
No,
I'm
I
kidding.
Oh,
I'm
she got the
sorry. Go
jokes
ahead.
today.
I was like, what am I doing?
No, no, no.
No. Okay.
Just the topic of discussion here.
Oh, okay, okay. Um, Um, yeah, right. And I think that that's something that you all think a lot and talk about too, right? You have training around de-escalation, which is so important. And so, we think about that from the lens of someone who is, walking into a shelter to surrender an animal or has questions about adoption or is running into issues, across the animal care and well-being and services spectrum. All these kinds of conversations are happening. So, like, how can we actually best show up so that we're setting ourselves up to get to solutions with people and being the strongest possible and most trusted messengers we can be. Um, there is a piece that we talk about around messaging with dignity, how, the way that we talk about people and animal issues really sets the stage for how people may think about us, how we may be thinking about people. I think, anytime a interaction happens, like both parties, I think about like, we're basically carrying in a lot of baggage, right? Like nobody's showing up to an interaction with a blank slate. It's like, from SPARC's standpoint, right, we're thinking about messaging and stories. So I think about all like the news media, the like, the social media posts, all that stuff that's in some of those suitcases. But it's also, the experiences that you've had with people before. It's also sometimes how we woke up that morning. Like, you know what? Like, we're not all the same on the same day. So we each show up into those situations with different baggage. And so, from Spark's standpoint, when we're thinking about messaging and stories, we're like, if the mainstream messaging and stories about people are different, like what we have in our heads when we're interacting with members of the public, or when members of the public have in their heads when they're interacting, right, with people in animal care work, because a lot of those mainstream stories and messages are different, right? Then how we show up can even potentially be different. So we think about those individual interactions and Spark, part of Spark's mission is taking on that big challenge of what are these big mainstream stories and messages? How can we mobilize them to be different so that people who are on the ground doing the work in the day to day, right? Like you have people who have something different in their suitcase to go in those situations. If that makes sense or answers
Yeah.
your question. Yeah.
It makes sense. And oh, go ahead, Ashley.
I was gonna say, because I saw on the website that you guys offer classes.
We do. Yeah, we're launching Spark's a year old. And as part of this sort of foundation that we're setting, we have a foundational training so people can come. They're in person as in they are online because I want to give people that chance to have that like one-on-one interactions. It's smaller cohorts. We get to dive deep into messaging. So we talk about the empathic listening piece. I haven't even talked about systems so much yet, but systems and systems framing, and as
Mhm.
well as the messaging with dignity. Like, how can we actually put into practice all these messaging pieces? And even getting into some of those details of here are some messages we can let go of and replace them with these new ones.
I think this is a really good segue of where Dan wants to go, I'm sure, but I'll go there first for him.
Thank you.
So, now in the day and age of everything where I feel like the industry, at least previously, I think we're moving away from this now, where we're trying to put everybody into this same square hole. Not all of our communities are the same. Where Dan's working out right now, is not the same as my agency here, or was it the same as where Lee's agency is? How do we tell the community to break away from language such as no kill or um just rhetoric that runs over that, where everybody's always comparing everything to that no kill stance?
Mhm.
What is Spark trying to do in that instance of things? Where I see y'all's principles is, system framing, empathetic listening, and messaging with dignity. A lot of us are trying to be as transparent as possible, but when we are transparent as possible, I feel like right now, especially with social media, it's kind of turned against us.
Yeah, yeah. It's particularly hard with social media where people can get so nasty. Um, so yeah, what can we do about that and the ways that people are thinking about our work and our organizations? That's such a great question. So, part of Spark's mission is we're thinking about it on the big national level and how we change that conversation. And um, I want to make sure that I'm specifically. So your question is like when you are dealing with our communities who are like the same rhetoric, like no kill or high kill or euthanasia is happening, like how do we actually have those conversations or
You're
go up
just gonna
against
take the
that?
dog and kill it, and
Yeah, like how do we message with dignity, when we're trying to be as transparent as possible, but when we are, it ends up turning against us, like I know there was a big movement, or there at least here in a lot of the bigger shelters, what I've seen, and shouts out to all the big facilities here who are just getting hammered on social media. I feel for all the
Yeah,
staff.
yeah.
You know, they're posting that, they're full, and then the rhetoric doesn't change from how can we help? It's like, well, they're gonna kill all these animals tomorrow, so how do we positively message that when all of us are being so compared to this unachievable standard that has been set for so many years now?
Yeah, yeah.
Can I just
Yeah.
jump in though? Unachievable versus arbitrary. I think there's that
Mm,
aspect too. I just have to throw that. That's my two
mm,
cents.
yeah. Well, so two thoughts. One, and I will say I'll get to it because I feel like it's the less exciting one to address in this specific instance when you're thinking about like what you're facing day to day. Because there's this piece that Spark is working on, which is can we help shift some of the national conversation that will then impact what you have to experience on the day
Yes,
to day?
please.
Yes. So that is part of what we are working on, right? Like, what are the messages we need to put out there to start to shift ideas and mindsets about what organizations that are helping animals, that are working with communities and working with people and animals doing on the day to day. And so that is, if we want to get away from this, like good or bad messaging, there's heroes and there's villains, right? And so we want to get away from that by actually, what can we replace that with? And a lot of that is getting away from villains. We're not talking about these stereotypes anymore. But when you're and so that is part of what we're working on because there's only you are in the midst of what you're doing in the day to day, right? So like the job of changing that national messaging, you got to do what you're doing on a day to day. in the day to day, I think what's really interesting, some of the things that we start to bring up, like through the training and the guides and the work that we're doing, is how some of the messages that we feel like have been the right messages to say may actually be backfiring on us and having unintended consequences. Because we are talking about like our shelters are so overwhelmed and we can't handle it. Like you have to adopt, don't shop. Like if you buy, they die. Like these are actually the stories we've been saying because these are the realities we're facing. We're like, we want people to know how bad this is so that they will do something differently or so that they will help. But in doing that, we've actually been putting in people's minds like, we're organizations that euthanize animals and it might happen a lot and we're totally overwhelmed. So what if we start talking about like, people in our organization, they're working their butts off every
Mhm.
day to care for animals. Um, Things have changed a lot. Things are not necessarily the way they were decades ago. And actually, year after year, we are seeing this getting better, and we are working so hard to make it better. We are treating animals as individuals. We are thinking about people who coming in our doors as individuals. We care about people in our community. We're here to help, right? All the things that you've been saying. And so if we were actually saying those kinds of things and actually like who we are, what makes us great, like how we're showing up day to day and working really hard, that's a different kind of message than, oh my gosh, we're really overwhelmed. Like, please come and adopt all of our animals right away. It's an emergency. And so it doesn't mean like we've been saying some horrible, evil thing. But if we can actually, like, we're part of that cycle of what people believe about our realities. So, what is that reality that we do want to put out there? And also seeing it, the interesting thing is people outside of our sector, they're not as interested in our problems. Like, if you're going to go buy like a soda, you don't really care if like the soda, like what's happening in the soda company, right? Like, you don't want to hear about the manufacturing drama or like if they've had a backup on their line. Like, you want to make, like, you want what you want. You want the soda, you want the thirst quenching, you want what you need. And so I think a lot of times we're talking about things from our perspective because it's hard and it's frustrating and it's upsetting, and we feel like that's where we can hook our communities in caring, but actually it's different. Like they're actually thinking about it from and looking at our work from a different perspective. They're like, I'm having a safety issue and I need help with, or I want to adopt an animal, or I have this concern. And like that's where our opportunity is to talk about the value that we bring to our community.
Just to jump on that, though, I think the experience from the field folks, and I'm only speaking from maybe my own experience or shared experiences, is the consumer, or however we want to label the community, will say things like, well, I don't want to call animal control because they will just euthanize it. And
Yep.
so it's trying to change that narrative by having those hard conversations. And I think you are right. I think the issue or the frustration is more internally, and there's a there's a real sense of undervalued appreciation for the work that the field does, and same with shelter. And what I've seen over the last 10 years is a very focused and targeted impact on changing the brand of animal shelters in this country, which is great. I
Yep.
fully support it. I think it's wonderful.
Yep.
But we don't do that for the field. We have all those things for shelter stuff, whether it's clear the shelters or all these foundations coming together to promote adoptions. But the field is just the field. Just
Hmm.
it's just the dark ages. I don't know. I don't know how we change that, but we're here to help some of that. And I think as we continue to highlight the successes and show the true worth that we do, that's the important part. And what I kind of want to transition into is talking about the current situation where a lot of animal control officers are helping out with the LA fires.
Mm.
And so showing that, highlighting that hard work that they do. I mean, these officers are working extended shifts. They're away from their family. They may be living out of hotels right now just for multiple reasons and doing that hard work. How does Spark deal with disasters and emergency preparedness? Like, what is there a link to that, and what does that look like?
Yeah, there's absolutely. So we see a lot of messaging issues crop up during disasters. One of them is there's a real organizations will take the spotlight away from local heroes and people doing the local work. And when we think about where that gets us. So one of the things, we think a lot about who needs to tell a story or how, where are heroes in a story. And so if you have like folks who are just trying to grind it out day to day, I was even thinking about, what happened with Hurricane Helene, and you have a shelter that's like washed away and people are just doing their best, it's flooded, doing their best to just take care of the animals that are here and the people and the animals in the community. Um, and then you have another organization that's not impacted, not directly impacted, maybe hundreds or thousands of miles away. And I mean, you need outside support. A lot of times when disasters happen, it's not like that, it's not needed, it's not appreciated or welcome. But when those organizations then completely take the spotlight and like channel all the attention, because they are coming in to provide support, that taking the spotlight also takes away potentially resources. And so when we think about messaging, right, it's like we're all, if you really care about animals, if you care about what's going on, you actually also have to be uplifting the voices and the realities of the local heroes who are doing that work on the ground day to day, because that's part of what sets the stage for the resources that people need long term, right? We're all in this together. We get a lot of like, I'm over here doing this and you're here doing this, but like we're all in this together, people. We all share this wanting to do what's best for animals. So like let's be in this together. Um, I'll also say that talking about systems is a big part of it. A lot of times when there's a disaster, it's like looking for a certain person to blame, or there's some, big story about maybe like a dog that was found in certain conditions or abandoned, and like that's the headline news. And so then what people start feeling is, oh my God, during disasters, people are such, sorry, can I curse on
Oh
this?
yeah, this is yeah.
People
Absolutely.
are such shit, they like leave their animals behind, and how can people do this? But you know what the reality is there's so many people in local communities that step in and are like helping each other,
Hmm.
helping animals, doing that work. But that's not what people remember. That's not what registers in people's minds. And actually, I said I was going to talk about systems, and then I didn't because I was going to do another thing. But the systems piece too is oh, right. We say people are shit, they left their animal behind. The systems pieces, like for example, in North Carolina after the hurricane, there were a lot of people because there hadn't been investments in local infrastructure that made it safe enough for people to take certain roads for transportation. There were a lot of folks that when they saw the storm was coming, like the options to evacuate with their animals wasn't necessarily there. Like they didn't have the option of necessarily going, like the cost of a hotel, I mean, so we get into looking at like, oh, someone stayed behind with their pet. Like, what a horrible, like, irresponsible person. But we have to talk about actually why. Like, it's not this simple choice, like I care or I don't care, or like I wanted safety or I didn't want safety. Not everybody has the same options for safety. Not everybody can make the same choices about what's best for them and their pet. And so we have to be having those conversations about systems. And to bring it back to the LA fires, I'm sure you're thinking about that too. Like, what led to this situation with the fires, that it's not like, one person did something really irresponsibly, but there's been things that have been building for a long time. And so not any one individual, like the choice they made with them for themselves or their animal in that moment, like you couldn't have, like, it's out of the hands of any one particular individual to like prevent everything that would have happened with the fires. I'm just curious what you all think.
Yeah, prevention. I mean, that's a whole nother podcast show, probably not even our arena. But I will say this, and this is we need a way for these larger organizations to grasp onto, and I know they try, But how come we don't have, like, why isn't there a highlighting animal control officers the same way there is shelters? And what I mean by that, and and rightfully so, I think firemen have always been, or firefighters have always been, like, viewed as heroes or hard work, etc. But 9/11 changed that in this country. September
Mm,
11th of 2001
yeah.
changed that in this country because it showed real time how these firefighters can get into these horrible situations. And that's, and not to take anything away from the hard work, because that is absolutely hard work, but our animal control officers are assaulted by people that don't want to comply. They're going into homes that are the same homes that police officers go into, firefighters go into, with not the same equipment, training, not the same resources. And it's
Yeah.
still like, it's just a dog catcher. I can't tell you how many times when I was in the field and people noticed I had a bulletproof vest on, and they were like, "Oh, dogs carry guns." And
Mm,
it's just like they just don't, they're not getting it. Like, the message isn't there.
mhm,
Animal control officers likely deal with more domestic violence, residual crimes. So not, maybe they don't respond to a domestic violence in progress, but they're going after the fact, whether that animal was abused, whether there was a bite in result of the DV. And domestic violence calls are the highest calls for officer safety threats for law enforcement in this country because
mhm,
of that emotion that's tied to it. And
mm.
so people just don't see that real part of it. And I wish, I don't know how we do it, and I think we'll get there. I think that's part of the reason we do this show is, yeah, sure, there's Animal Control Officer Appreciation Week, which also shares with, like, dispatch.
Dispatcher.
Dispatch.
Yeah, so, and we don't need that, but what we need is some sort of event or some sort of idea, some sort of campaign to help raise awareness. Purina, nope, not Purina, Pedigree dog food company has a commercial, or had, I don't think it's still running. It's one of the best commercials I've ever seen, that represents our profession,
Mm,
in the public. And they, it's actually from, like, England. So it's the RSPCA agents going out to a house, pouring rain, this dog sleeping on a dirty bed, and it's limping. And the agents, like, it's just so well done. I can maybe put a link to it in the show notes here so people can see it. But that's like the first time that I've ever seen some sort of branded company kind of take us to the next level. You have that Goofy show on Fox that some people like, but it's comedy, and it still makes fun of us in the profession. It's not showing us in a positive way. And that
mm.
messaging, I think, needs to change. And I hope that we can all come together and find ways to do that.
I
You know,
agree.
oh,
No, go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Ash.
Uh, I was gonna say, unfortunately, communication in general, one negative can undo, what is it, 10 positives or something like that. And unfortunately, um, and this goes back to, the disaster response and, you know, animal control in general. Oh, we had uh, a dog that was actively attacking somebody get shot. Well, you know, that person's life was saved, but that doesn't matter because the dog was shot. That doesn't, and that completely negated all of the animals that made it home that were taken out of bad situations in the week prior.
Mhm.
Um, or the one dog that was tied up to the bridge during a hurricane that overshadowed the fact that there were so many people that were trying to do the best that they could for all the other animals that were in the line of the hurricane.
Mhm.
How do we fix that?
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah.
well, to your point too, Lee, like, again, that bull terrier that was saved by that sheriff's deputy, that was tied to the poster in the hurricane. We do that every day.
Right.
Every day. But
Every day, but it
if
was not animal control that did it.
correct, and if it's a different type of agency, whether it's PD, fire, code enforcement, they're held as heroes, but yet we do this every day and we're just seen as the dog catcher.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I hear that frustration. Should I call you Wisconsin Bishop or
That's fine. That's
That's
fine.
the best way to do
like,
it.
are we at that level? Can I call you?
We are.
Yeah,
We
cute.
are.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And when we think about that from a messaging standpoint, which is why more people sharing the same messages in the same ways, the right kind of messages is really important. I always think, when you're in a restaurant and it's like really loud because everybody's having all these different sorts of conversations and it's just noise. And if you are going to make it above the noise, you got to be like real loud and real dramatic, which is what you're right, which is what we see on social media. People get real loud, real nasty. And then we know this about social media too. It's like the nastier, the more negative, the more likely something is to spread. It is more likely than positive things.
Mhm.
But when we're in that restaurant, everybody's having a different conversation, right? So like to make it above, but if everybody is actually having the same conversation, then it's more like a choir, right? It's loud. And if you have one person that's over here saying something loud and obnoxious, you're not going to be able to hear them above the people above us saying the same things loudly together. And so the more that we can get on the same page and the more that we can feel like yeah, like we're in this together, we're going to talk about this like we're in this together, we're going to treat each other with dignity in this space, like the louder and more consistent we can make our voices, the less strong those voices will be. And then when things do come up, like you have a community of people of support who are gonna back it up. Um, and it's I mean I will say I'm curious what you all think about this because I think about my early days. One of my first paid job in animal sheltering, I was working at DC Animal Care and Control in Southeast DC. We had I think we took in maybe about 17,000 animals a year. We euthanized maybe upwards of 70% of them. I don't know that it's the same today, but that's what it was like when I was there. And I was working in adoptions, but I remember this. Um, I like have this really vivid memory of one day sitting in the adoptions office with my manager. And we were joking because in the city there was DC Animal Care and Control. Uh Not a great facility. We didn't have a lot of resources. We were taking in any animal that came in any time of day. And there was another facility in DC that was very well funded. They were limited admission. I mean, they had just built a new place. It was beautiful. There was a waterfall in it, right? And so one
Mm.
of our favorite pastimes was sitting around talking about how different we were and like how and so what had happened was there was an animal that had come into the other place, was aggressive. They didn't feel like they could handle it. So they called animal control to come get the animal. And one of our officers went and got the animal. And so we're joking. We're like, this is all the evidence we need to show that like we're the real animal people, like strong and and capable. And like this other place with their ridiculous waterfall is like coming up to us to do the hard work. And but what's so interesting when I think back to sitting and having that conversation, and like, I think it was so real and I remember it so well. But when I think back to it, I think here we are, like the same organization, like organizations in the same city, dealing with the same populations of animals, the same neighborhoods, the same communities. We work for different organizations, but like nobody's getting paid great. Like we're all showing up every day, crazy hours, holidays, working late, sometimes dealing with really tough stuff and traumatic things. We actually have way more in common than not, but we have created this divide. And like, when we were sitting around joking, it was like I was perpetuating like that divide. And even in saying that, like I knew how I felt if I showed up in a room with people from the other shelter. I was like, right? And so I was part of perpetuating that. And I wonder if you all ever see, feel, or experience that in this space.
I mean, I have a real-time answer for you. So, and I'm going to say names because I think it's important so people understand the scope. When I worked for the municipal Denver shelter, we also had Denver Dumb Friends League, in the same community. Denver Dumb Friends League is a huge nonprofit organization. And if you're not familiar with them, they're amazing. Check them out, ddfl.org. They do some great work, not only in the community, but nationally as well. But they're in the same space as the City and County of Denver Municipal Shelter. And I will tell you, from my experience, they had a lot of impact on what we did as an actual municipal shelter, which was weird to me. I didn't necessarily understand it. They helped design the current Denver animal shelter and even had influence on what their adoptable space looked like versus the stray space. So they envisioned the municipal shelter being a dog pound, a city pound where all the strays went, and then their facility being the adoption center, the location.
Mm.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with what they did. I just think that I think as I look at it from a whole, and when I used to work in Denver, and you'd go and they had when you'd walk into the adoption side, it's small, it's tiny in comparison to there's four stray weight facility like stray weight holds, and they're huge. There's maybe I don't even know how many in each kennel. I think they could house over 200 dogs, maybe. And I don't want to say that with validation because I don't remember the numbers. But when you walked into the adoption side, it's really nice. You can see like there's cats in a big community cat room. When I say big, like 8 by 10, maybe if that. And then you have the dog side where these big windows, and they're in the real life room, so they're not in the standard, aluminum cages or metal cages. It looks more appeasing to the eye, but the space is so small. Like it's out of comparison to the stray weight side, it is a fraction of kennel space. And so the focus was that, and there was a time too where if any stray was brought into the Denver Dumb Friends League and it was found in the city and county of Denver, one of our officers had to go pick it up from them. And that
Mm-hmm.
they wanted to create an environment where the strays stayed at the municipal shelter and all the adoptables were at the Denver Dumb Friends League. And I don't know, like I don't know the right answer. And I know this happens in other places too. Is that the right model, or can they both do the same thing? And I don't know if that has changed since I've been gone. I think there was some leniency after they built or redid their space. And so I just know this. When I started in this industry, I actually registered to volunteer at the Denver Dumb Friends League, who had over 700 active volunteers at the time.
Mm.
And I also signed up to volunteer at the Denver Municipal Shelter. And what I realized is the municipal shelter needed my help more than the nonprofit. So less people were interested in volunteering at a municipal shelter than they were a nonprofit. And during that time, I valued both in the same sense of them both being there to help animals. What I found is when I finally got hired on by Denver, all the negative shit talking that happened from Denver because they were why for whatever reason upset with their experiences with the Denver Dumb Friends League. There were several officers that hated the fact that some of the Denver Dumb Friends League humane investigators would come into the city and county of Denver and steal calls from them, that type of stuff. So there's animosity beyond amongst equals in the aspects of we're both there trying to help people help animals, but
Yeah.
we lose sight of that because I think ego gets in the way. And it was a really unique time for me to be able to see it from both lenses, as a someone who signed up to volunteer there, someone who doesn't have that same vision or view that some of the old time officers had when I started about that agency. And I befriended someone in Dumb Friends League when they were there. I would anytime I would go over, if they would take a parvo dog from us because they had more resources, I would just stop in their office and talk to them for 5, 10 minutes and just see how things were going to try to bridge that gap. But there is a silo there, and I don't know how they bring it closer together because at the end of the day here, they're trying to do the same thing. So
Yeah, I appreciate that so much because uh we're really on the same team, and like
mhm.
we're so much stronger when we're working as though we're on the same team, but the way we are talking about each other, it's like we're on different teams. And
Mhm.
so what happens when we start talking? Like we're on the same team, you know? What happens when we show up for the other people on our team? And I think things would be really different, right? And it's a cycle. It's sort of like we have an experience, and so that impacts how we talk about who is on our team and who's not. And then that makes us feel like that reinforces who we feel like is who's on our team and who's not. But it's like, what if we interject? What if we make that go the other way? If what if we are saying those messages like we're in this together and we're on the same team and this our community, right? Like our work together, how that can impact our mindsets and then change the kinds of like the little decisions that we make here and there, the interaction, showing up in somebody's office and having a conversation, seeing that okay, there might be a different logo, you might be working in a different building, but I recognize that you're also someone who's dedicated to your job and you're working hard and you're
Mhm.
trying to do what's best for people and animals. I mean, that would just be a totally different world. And I think we should work on trying to live in that world. That's why Spark is here, you know?
I think it's a huge problem in the industry overall. I mean, even just between the two different fields, animal sheltering, animal control. It's hard. It's really hard when you have a detached animal control agency that doesn't work in the shelter because it's just pick up and dump. And, I've been there, I've done that, and I won't work for an agency like that because it makes for not necessarily heartless officers, but they don't see the impact that they're having if they don't do what they need to do in the field.
Mhm.
And it's kind of a culture that we create in our agency too, is that, the ACOs need to realize, if they're not going out there and putting 110% to try to get that animal home, what kind of impact that has on the shelter and vice versa,
Right.
So, um, I just in the industry alone, we're battling one another because we're not all on the same page when we're all on the same team. And then on a national level too, it's just everybody against everybody. But again, I feel too is that, the big national organizations are also trying to fit everybody into the same square hole, and that's
Mhm.
Right.
not the case. We can't treat all agencies the same. Every community is different. Every community has different issues. So it's something that we need to work on.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great points.
I think there's so much more we could talk about, and you're more than welcome if you ever want to come back on. I don't,
Sure, this is fun.
I
This is
know
great.
we went a little long. I just want to make sure before we wrap things up, I want to make sure that if there was something that you wanted to chat about that we didn't chat about, that our listeners hear, and I also want the listeners to know to check out. It's the website is Spark Insight, so SPARC insight.org. Again, sparkinsight.org. Check it out for some cool stuff there.
No, we covered a lot. There's always more that can be talked
Nice.
about and said about this. So
Yeah.
maybe we will talk again. But no, I mean, I appreciate you all for seeing the um seeing that not everything is like heroes and villains, black and white, good and bad, that there are ways we need to be talking about people and animals, our work, our communities in different ways, and that is a huge opportunity that we have to make some changes and the realities that we face in our day to day. It can feel really overwhelming, all these problems. But what we post on social media, how we show up in an interaction, that is actually some real power that we can have every single day. Like that's a choice we're making every day. So I love that y'all are seeing that. And thanks for having me to talk about messaging and stories some more.
So I want a last question, Dan, if you're okay with that.
You got it. Yeah, anytime.
So Hannah, what do y'all see for 2025? I know there's a lot of slogan and things like that for things supposed to be happening this year. What does
Mm.
Spark see for 2025 in animal welfare?
Oh, well, I see I'm really excited that, like I said in the beginning, the reason why we exist it was because people said, oh, we want that. We want a message differently. We want this to be different. We want our realities to be different. And I see us consistent, like I see that we can keep moving in that directions. I see the way I see programs changing, they've been changing for years, and now our messaging and stories can start catching up with that. That will continue to help propel that good work forward, that can continue to help us build the connections that we want to have with our communities, with each other in this space. And so the work that we're doing is going to continue being around, what do people need? Like, you want some training? You want some more guides? Like, let's social media campaigns. And so this year we are really getting into prioritizing what are going to be the most powerful things that this space needs and wants. And by the end of the year, you're going to start seeing even more of that in action.
We uh, we appreciate your time, and one of the things that we didn't hit on, and I'm just going to throw it out there as a last minute tease, is check out our website, keepithumane.com/smart, because SMART was designed to help with the messaging around how we label animal shelters. And so I thought that having a smart shelter in a time where everything is smart, smartphone, smart car, smart watch, smart house, smart light bulb,
Yeah.
smart shelters. And I'll be honest, I just don't have the bandwidth to really manage all that. So if any of the listeners find an interest, or smart just really rings their ears like, ooh, this is a great message on how we um, kind of come full circle from when animals were considered dumb, uh, in the language that we use, and that was just the vocabulary to now being smart. I think it's a good a good circle story. So please check out our website, keepithumane.com. Please like, rate, share the podcast. You don't have to give it 5 stars if you don't want to, but still rate it. Those ratings help us grow and get other listeners. We want to spread the message as much as we can. Don't forget to go to our Instagram and Facebook. Bishop, Wisconsin Bishop, you weren't here, but TikTok is gone, so we can't send people to TikTok. Um, but maybe at some point they can go.
Maybe in a
Got
couple
plenty of
weeks.
other social medias to be reached out on. So
As we like to say at the end of every program, thanks for listening.
help people.
Help animals.
Keep it humane.